All right, it's 5:45. We're going to call the workshop to order. It is July 2nd, 2026. The first presentation is receive a report and hold a discussion and provide staff direction on potential amendments to the ethics ordinance regulation. Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. You may recall about a year and a half ago when we updated the ethics ordinance. At that time, our goal was to come up with some new procedures in the event we didn't have a full board. And I think y'all remember that full discussion and that challenge we were having at the time, that we had a couple years in a row where we didn't have we just didn't have enough applicants to fill the board. That problem was solved in your last series of board appointments, so back in August, and so we do now have that. But at that time, we mentioned to you that we may be coming back when we could get to it and tweak the ethics ordinance. We wanted to go back and look at it and see if there were any other things we needed to add to it, any changes we needed to make. We enlisted Patricia's help with that, and so there was some information in your packet with a red line version of that ordinance that hopefully you had a chance to look at, and she was just going to kind of walk through some of that tonight, not for action. As always, we want to put it on the workshop before we bring you back an actual ordinance. I don't think any of these are earth-shattering. There was some questions and some direction we may need on some specific terminology, and she'll walk through that with you tonight. And so y'all have that document in your packet if you want to follow along. That's all we're doing tonight.
Okay, and so we had started some cleanup, and Lana and I have been working on trying to get together a training so that we can get that process moving. And so I was trying to go through, as I mentioned, and just kind of make sure that we were consistent with state law and what we were doing, and to clean up a few issues. I know the mayor had received some comments, and so we tried to kind of look at those as well. I didn't want to do a lot of changes until I basically had some feedback from y'all. But what I did was I went through and tried to just clean up, addressing, what I could to give us a little more procedure and clarity. So the first change is in the definitions, and we had listed it's city official, which includes the council and all boards and commissions. So I just simplified that definition so that we didn't have, right now we have a list of all the boards and commissions. So that might increase and it might decrease. So I just changed that to all appointed boards and commissions of the city, and then of course elected officials. I left that there. On the 39.07 was the next section that I made changes to, and really what I was doing in 39.7, it's A1, was sort of codifying what we have been doing already, and what the AG says we should be doing, which is if you have a conflict of interest, you fill out the affidavit, you identify where that conflict arises from. When that item comes up, you leave the room, you do not participate in any deliberation or any vote, and you remain out of the room until that matter is resolved. So that is the process we have been utilizing, but this just kind of codifies it in here for everyone to see. The primary changes we did were in training, and some of the concerns I think that the mayor received some comments on were just some making sure that everybody knew these and transparency. So looking at the training, we basically kind of tweaked in 39.10, we tweaked the training. And basically we're looking at training as an orientation for new elected and new appointed officials, and then annual training. So what we talked about doing, Lana and I, as far as education, is putting together some type of training, and Scott and I talked about this one day as well, about recording this training session so that we would have it, and so that folks could go back and look at that in an effort to have transparency. With the training session would be materials are going to be provided to all the elected and appointed officials. We'll maintain the materials on the website that kind of go over and explain the city's ethics ordinance so that people understand it a little bit better. But the training would be when someone's been appointed or elected. At this point, state law requires that you'd have Open Meetings Act and Public Information Act training within 90 days. So we would just add this ethics training to it, have y'all fill out a separate certification that says when you did the training, date and time, whether you did it in person or whether you, viewed the recording, and get those submitted to Lana. And then the question I had after that, I think you know, the transparency issue and the request for more frequent training. I have this annually. I don't know if y'all want to do that. If it's a recording, I also don't want it to be this check the box thing where you just go look at the same recording. But our ethics ordinance doesn't really change a whole lot. The provisions that we have in it now as far as prohibitions are fairly consistent with state law regulations with regard to what elected officials can and cannot do. So basically, that is what I have done on this, is I've clarified the training. And again, a training session is gonna be in person, we're gonna record it, and then the elected officials and appointed officials will do that certificate and get that turned in. And then the question is, do you want to require this of everybody, including yourselves, annually, as just a refresher?
Can we do a more limited thing just on changes?
Yes, that's, yes,
Like after an election?
Yes.
Or after an appointment?
yes.
Because currently with the state, like with open meetings, we have so many days after we've been reelected to get those types of trainings done. If we just followed state law with this training, seems like that would be pretty easy to organize.
What does state law require?
State law doesn't cover ethics training. State law requires
Okay.
Texas Public Information Act, and Open Meetings Act. There is also some financial training that's.
Are most of those 90 days?
Those, under state law, you have to complete those within 90 days of appointment or election, so.
I would say newly,
You have the recorded training that we update every 4 years or something, every couple of sessions. The legislature, because that's when it's gonna change, right?
If they change anything with
Yeah,
regard
and
to
then-
state law regulations, yes.
Annually, we just have a workshop item where you tell us what the changes are, and then we can decide if we wanna require people to have training on the changes.
Okay, so
They're not significant then.
right, and that's why I just didn't know the frequency that you wanted. We really don't have a lot of changes to our ethics ordinance. We have, because we recognize we had some holes, and so we filled that, as Scott mentioned. But then, other than that, I mean, the prohibitions are fairly consistent with state law, and those are the things that are actionable under the ethics ordinance. And typically, ethics ordinances are going to be based upon those types of standards. People's personal ethics may differ and vary, so that's why we try to come up with a more objective standard that can be measured against, and that's what we have in Corinth's ordinance.
And didn't we reach the conclusion, I think we had, or at least made aware of circumstances where other cities had more broader ethics requirements, but they're really toothless. In other words, you can't really kick somebody off the city council.
Correct.
Or any, in other words, as it relates to the council specifically.
Yes.
There's not really much you can do because the voters get to pick, and if it doesn't violate state law, you're just creating a mess without really resolving any kind of problem. Am I remembering
Sometimes
that
people
correctly?
think that somebody can be removed from office for an ethics violation, and you can't by your own body. If you're on a committee or commission, the city council can certainly do that.
Yeah.
But if you're an elected person, unless you've got some state law violation that causes you to be ineligible, there's nothing else to be done, really, as far as removing someone from the council.
Okay, so as it sits, and I know that you've got a question, our ethics prohibitions especially match state law.
Yes.
And then you had a question about
Substantial interest versus
substantial versus.
conflict of interest.
Okay, yes, and I apologize.
is that a change?
Substantial interest is what the state uses in state law. So the city has what they're referring to as a conflicting interest. I'm trying to find my notes. City has a conflicting interest standard, which is a more lenient or a more stringent standard. So under state law, excuse me, you have a conflict in a business entity if you own 10% or more of the voting stock, or you own 10% or more, or $15,000 of the fair market value of the business. Corinth's ordinance has 5% or more of the voting stocks, or $600 in the fair market value. Or if the official receives more than $600 in gross revenue, annual revenue from a business. You also have, under your conflicting interest, serves on a board of directors of a business entity, or serves on the board of directors as an officer of a nonprofit. And I think these have caused some confusion. If you are serving on the board of directors of a business entity, that's not unethical or a conflict. But if you're serving on that board and they're coming to the city and they're asking for something or they're contracting for something, then you just need to recuse yourself. That's the solution. The solution is if you have an interest, we've got this process for recusal. So those are a couple of things that are more stringent, other than the money amounts that are more stringent, 600 versus, 15,000, 5% versus 10%. So that's more stringent in your conflicting interests. State law and attorney general opinions speak to substantial interest. So they don't cover individual city ordinances and those standards. They just go key to the state law, and that's where those numbers come from. Is
So
from
to be
government.
clear though, that doesn't preclude the city from doing business with that entity. It just requires a recusal.
Yes, yes. And it's only if they're doing business. So that's why I said it's just a little, the way it's written in here, I think has caused some confusion in the past as well. But it simply is your remedies recusal.
Does anybody have an issue with keeping it the way that it is? It's a little more strict, but
I think some cities do
Like a
that.
higher standard.
yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Is there any tie-in between that and any potential liability to the city?
Liability in what?
In other words, if you didn't recuse yourself and the body took action, is there any tie-in to any statute somebody could use to find the city liable or try to say that the action wasn't legitimately taken?
If you have a person who has a conflict and they do not recuse yourself, then you can be subject to saying that the action was not valid and it wasn't approved or disapproved, if that person did not recuse themselves and if they made a difference in the vote. If they didn't recuse themselves and it was 5-0, then no, that's not any type of issue. But there's no exposure to this for a person sitting there and participating when they have a conflict of interest. If they have conflict of interest under state law, which is the substantial interest and that higher standard, then they can be subject to some prosecution there. So that can be a problem for them personally, but not for the city.
But also process-wise, I forget.
Okay.
Get my head around it. When we make a purchasing decision, we're either gonna go to RFP or we're gonna use a state-sanctioned purchasing vehicle like a DIR or something, right? I mean, we're not just handing business over to somebody who walks their company in.
Very thorough.
So we've got multiple walls between.
Yes, we have a procurement policy and we follow state law. So we either do an RFP, we do competitive bid, we go to the buy board. If it's a professional service, then they've got internal processes for having to kind of vet those. So the city does have a very healthy procurement policy and they do follow it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about acting on development stuff.
That was too.
Like if somebody worked at a company that was coming to city council for a plan development, is that what you're asking, Sam?
Well, I just want to make sure that we're not creating a liability for the city that we don't have to. In other words, if we have a higher standard and it subsumes within it, in other words, there's a one-to-one relationship at least between the substantial interest and our conflict, then I don't see it creating any potential liability. Because if necessarily, if you have a substantial interest, you would also have a conflict. So I guess I would just want to make sure that our conflict of interest provision as one of the prongs exactly matches state law. And then it can go higher if
Okay, yes, the categories.
not
of-
making sense.
Yes, I think I follow you. The categories of conflict, which is ownership in a business, stocks, those types of things, ownership in property, real estate, those all are reflected within your ordinance. The percentages and numbers are lower. So
Okay.
if someone had that conflict, and let's say they had net revenue of $700 a year from a business, they would be violating the ethics ordinance, but they would not be prosecutable under state law because they're not violating that
It
substantial
would be a
interest.
conflict under our, so there's not a
Yes.
circumstance where they're gonna be in violation of state law and not in violation of.
Correct, since the state law, yes, yeah. You're
Higher.
more stringent.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't more stringent, but somehow missed a category that would disqualify.
We have all the categories included, which are generally the interest in the business or interest in property. Those are all included. Y'all just have those set at different standards.
Okay. I'll stop.
Okay. No, that was a great question. So aside from this, there's nothing else in our current ethics ordinance that doesn't match or satisfy state law,
No, sir.
definitionally or procedurally.
No, sir. No.
And if anything, our standards are higher in every way.
Yes, they are.
Where do we land on training?
I think what I heard,
One video training,
appoint-
one workshop.
appointment or election.
to
Okay.
See if, tell the council, here's what the changes are, do you wanna do more training?
Do that each year.
Yeah.
And I don't think we need that part in the ordinance necessarily. If we're just gonna do a workshop, we just need to put it on the rotating calendar for a workshop.
Yeah. But any newly elected person or appointed person, we
Within
would
90
give them the training, and they could do it on the, walk through the video, sign, we're gonna have a document that they sign that said they did it, or we'll call a meeting and we'll just do it up here, so.
And that'll apply for us as it does the appointed board members. And there's one other piece to that question.
And it counts if you're reelected too.
Right.
So it's the,
We're elected to a different position.
Or elected to.
Yeah.
a different position. Yeah, open meetings, I got quite good at Open Meetings Act training, actually, over this last year. Okay, and so all of that stuff will be handled through city secretary as far as the training documentation and available for open records.
yes.
Okay. That's all I have. Anybody have any additional suggestions?
No, I'm good.
All right. Number 2 is to discuss any items on the regular session agenda. Do we have anybody that has any questions about regular session? Okay. Sir, do we have executive session items that we want to try to knock out?
Certainly can, you don't, we have a public hearing at 6:30, but we could probably knock out quite a bit,
Okay.
maybe get it all.
Well, let's do that.
30 minutes.
Let's try to do that real quick, and then we'll reconvene at 6:30 for the public hearing.
Oh, you look.
You good?